So yeah, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm delighted that we're able to put on this webinar looking at mass transit options for Leeds in the context of Leeds and West Yorkshire. We've got some really interesting speakers over the course of the next hour or so, which I hope will give you a flavour of different options, different technologies, different ways in which rapid mass transit can be rolled out. Before I introduce the first speaker and introduce the panel, I just wanted to say a few words of background really about why we decided to run this webinar. Now I'm from Leeds Civic Trust. I'm the director of Leeds Civic Trust, and the trust has in recent years had an increasing interest in the transport system in the city. We published a transport vision a few years ago. And something that Leeds Civic Trust has always been interested in is this idea of a mass transit system for the city. We were supporters of the various proposals that have come over our desks in the last few decades, but haven't actually come to fruition. We had a tram system, of course, in Leeds up until 1959. And then there was a gap of probably 20 years as the famous motorway city of the 70s came into being, and the motor car became a more popular mode of transport. And then really from the 80s onwards, there's been a reignited debate, if you like, about whether Leeds should try and push for a tram system, which was the suggestion from the 80s onwards, and then more recently a trolleybus system. Both of those initiatives, the super tram system and the NGT trolleybus system, ultimately didn't get through the various regulatory and planning procedures. The government called a halt to the super tram scheme, and the inspector called a halt to the trolleybus scheme. So as of today, and this is something that is often said, Leeds is the largest city in Europe without a mass rapid transit system. So in the last couple of years, both Leeds City Council and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have been looking at transport strategy. Leeds produced a new transport strategy taking the city up to 2030 and beyond in the last 12 months. And the Combined Authority have also produced a document looking at connectivity across the region. Both of these documents refer to the need to develop a mass transit solution to travel in West Yorkshire. And then, of course, most recently, we had the announcement from the government that HS2 wouldn't be coming up to Leeds, but as some sort of consolation prize, this £100 million grant was dangled as a way of kickstarting options for mass transit in the next 5-10 years and beyond. And so the Combined Authority are currently working up proposals to see how that might be implemented and how that might be produced in practice. So it's a really good time for us to be having this conversation as the city and West Yorkshire starts to think about how a mass rapid transit system might look today, as opposed to the schemes that were looked at in the 80s, 90s and 2000s. So looking at different options, looking at different approaches, looking at areas of the country that are well down the road, others that are just starting, seem to us to be a really sensible thing, and also looking at different technologies. I think the approach that the Combined Authority are taking here in West Yorkshire is to think about the most important routes and then think about the type of transport, the mode of transport that best fulfills those routes and the frequencies required. So I think the precise technology to be used is still up for debate. So what we're going to do over the next hour or so is hear from three places. We're going to hear from Belfast, we're going to hear from Nottingham, and we're going to hear from South Wales. Different schemes, different technologies, different stages in the process, if you like, of introducing and running mass transit schemes. And then at the end of the session, we'll have a bit of a round table, and we'll consider what we've heard, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So please do use the chat function throughout the next hour or so. Put in any questions. We'll mop those up at the end of the session, and we'll hopefully have about half an hour or so to consider those. I should say that the one absence, at least on the screen, the obvious absence, is the representative from the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Of course, here in Leeds and in West Yorkshire, it's an election year, so HERDA rules make that sort of make it difficult for Leeds and West Yorkshire to be too visible, I suppose, promoting live schemes. I know they'll be listening in the background. They may ask some questions anonymously, who knows? But the plan will be, and I know Wyke are very keen to do this, to have a follow-up session in the next couple of months, taking stock of some of the things that we hear about today, and then thinking about where West Yorkshire is in terms of this process, and the money that the government have given them to kickstart it. So that's the plan in the next couple of months. But today is very much about experiences from elsewhere in the country. I'm not going to introduce the panel in turn. I'm going to ask each of the people on the screen to introduce themselves as they start the presentation. But I think we're going to kick off first with Robin. So Robin, if you want to share your screen, any slides you've got, and we will all switch our cameras off and mute ourselves so Robin has the screen whilst he's talking. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the invitation today to come along and share some thoughts on the Belfast Rapid Transit System, which we've branded as Glider. Just by way of introduction, first of all, I was involved in the project for approximately 8 years, from its inception right through to completion in 2018. I'm currently the head of strategic planning and business change within TransLink, which is the public transport operator within Northern Ireland. But I spent quite a bit of time within the Department for Infrastructure, which is responsible for the road infrastructure the system runs on as well. So I've seen the project from all sides, and hopefully today I can give you some sense of what's involved in a project like this, and also some sense of the outcomes. Obviously, the system came to fruition in 2018, so we had a full year of operation before COVID-19, and certainly the information that I present today is largely on the basis, obviously, of the pre-COVID situation. So the project itself, it was a £95 million flagship project for the Northern Ireland Executive. It was primarily aimed at reducing journey times, introducing higher levels of punctuality and reliability, and being delivered on 2 of the major bus routes in Belfast. Was about delivering a system for the future, which would connect predominantly East and West Belfast, but also into a new development area in the Titanic Quarter in the Harbour Estate. The key focus, and something I'll focus on today, was the whole system approach that we took to this. And I think it is an important consideration when you undertake, particularly a bus-based system. It shouldn't be treated like introducing buses onto bus corridors. It isn't quite as simplistic as that. I think it needs a lot more consideration. Systems obviously have been trialled over the years within other parts of the UK, and I would suggest maybe that some of them haven't been a success, perhaps because there hasn't been the attention to detail across all elements of it. And in many ways, you need to consider in the context of delivering a tram-like system. So when we were choosing the vehicles, we went for something that was particularly tram-like in its nature. They have become quite an image now of Belfast. We've opted for very modern halts and interchanges. Integration is a key aspect of the project, ensuring we can integrate with other modes and other forms of public transport. Bus priority is essential. A very strong brand, which has certainly been adopted now within Belfast. You rarely hear people referring to the gliders as buses, they just refer to them as gliders. New ticketing system. extensive passenger information systems, and a real strong focus as well on the staff training to ensure that the quality of system was there and that the customer experience was right. The system itself then, as I said, runs from east to west Belfast. The East Belfast element is roughly about half the route, as is west, with a small extension then into Titanic Quarter, which you can see running to the north there. Key elements, I think, in considering where the system runs are the key attractors along those routes. And the system passes a number of key points, including the two largest hospitals in Northern Ireland. So there's significant demand, trip generation as a result of those, meeting essential needs, and that in many ways came to the fore during COVID, and the need to get essential workers to work by public transport. Glider played a significant role in that. The delivery programme itself then started in around 2010 with the outline design and outline business case. The detailed design and delivery took around 4 years, and the system became live in September 2018. There was a focus on a whole route improvement as we undertook the works along the 20-odd kilometres. And that was really aimed at bringing tangible benefits to the communities through which the system runs. So the system, whilst you are focusing on delivering the infrastructure for the glider system itself, it gave the opportunity to upgrade the roads and footpaths, improve facilities for pedestrians, for cycling, improve the streetscape, and just create a general catalyst for regeneration along the routes. Bus lanes, always controversial. I haven't seen anywhere, certainly within the UK, where they aren't, but it's a key element. And whatever system you decide to provide, it needs priority. We've opted for 7 to 7 bus lanes, 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. There is some relaxation during the day for loading and unloading of businesses, but it is the single most important element of any public transport system, that you give it that priority to make sure that it's efficient and reliable for people, and therefore more attractive than a private car. The services themselves operate around 8 services per hour, so it's about a 7 to 8 minute interval. We've reorganised the services that did run along those corridors previously. We have a number of feeder services that feed into those at the extremities of the routes. I'll show you a bit more detail on that in a moment. Off-board ticketing has been a significant benefit in the system, so it does very much operate as you would expect the tram to operate. The vehicle pulls in, 3 sets of double doors can open, and people already have purchased their tickets and board and aligned accordingly. And the fares are aligned and integrated with the other existing bus services. There's a strong focus, I say, on the supplementary and complementary infrastructure as well, such as the halts, and we deliberately termed them as halts rather than bus stops, because they have a much more platform-like feel to them, with the ticket machine, with the validators, the real-time passenger information. And again, it was about giving that sense of quality and of permanence along the routes. We reduced the number of existing bus stops to, again, improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. And the stops are spaced around 350 metres apart. We did a lot of work on integration, as I say, through the system. We also introduced secure cycle shelters, which again were branded and treated in the same way as the halts, to make sure that it's clear that these were part of a multimodal journey, which could be undertaken in conjunction with the glider. The vehicles themselves then, as I say, we went for something which has a tram-like appearance. At the time, bear in mind, we were purchasing these vehicles about 8 years ago now. So at that time, diesel electric hybrid was the optimum solution in terms of the green technology. Certainly, if we were doing it now, we would be looking at zero emission. They carry around 105 people. They space for wheelchairs, prams, buggies. They're double glazed with air conditioning. Again, focus on the customer experience. A variety of seating options within them, audio-visual passenger information, free Wi-Fi, and USB charging. A lot of work was also undertaken on the the design of the vehicles with disability groups, and certainly the mobility aspect of it was a key focus for us in making sure this service was as accessible as possible for everyone. So we produced mock-ups in conjunction with the supplier Van Hool of the vehicle fleet, made some tweaks to the internal designs of their standard layout to take on board the comments of some local representatives from those groups. And again, that was particularly well received. I believe it's delivered a system which has been well received by all. I mentioned earlier just that the end of the routes, we obviously have a situation whereby previously you would have had bus services, double-deck vehicles running into residential estates, large residential estates in both East and West Belfast at the extremity of the route. When you move to something like bus rapid transit, you need to treat it a wee bit more like a railway in that respect. And what we do is we bring it to an interchange point, which in East Belfast is a large park and ride, over 500 parking spaces. That's the image on the left, and on the right, we took the opportunity to integrate with a regeneration scheme in West Belfast. And this was a new civic centre which was built, which is the transport interchange, but has sort of other civic uses as well. So it was a significant regeneration opportunity. And then from those interchanges, the plans that you can see in the top there show the feeder routes then that serve the large areas that are adjacent to these interchanges. And to give you just a sense of scale, the one on the right in West Belfast, those routes serve a population of around 30,000 people. So those then feed into the interchange and feed on to the glider system into Belfast. Significant change required then within the business to deliver such a system. And one element was a new service centre to accommodate the vehicle fleet. It also accommodates a number of existing buses, and it's future-proof for phase 2 of BRT. The brand, it's become quite iconic, certainly within Belfast, and we have a lot of interest in the system from across the UK and across Europe. The focus, I think, on the brand was very much about getting people interested in it, to try and see it as something very different. It does look and feel different than the traditional bus service. And I think it's important when you undertake the effort to get these major programs in place that you don't lose sight of the need to engage with the community and make sure that everyone takes some sense of ownership, if you like, and some sense of pride in what the city is delivering. So we had an extensive campaign. We've over 150 engagement events, and throughout a period of several months, we started to whet people's appetite in terms of the brand. So we would have had billboards appearing with these sorts of messaging on it to get people a sense that something was coming to Belfast that was quite different. Our marketing department then, I guess, somewhat got carried away with the language as we moved on into the Christmas period, and some interesting play on the word glider. But I think when we reflect back on it now, looking back at the first full year of operation, which we obviously managed to achieve, we'd almost 2 years of full operation prior to COVID coming in. But in the first year, we saw about 35% growth on the glider corridors. Now, the delivery of the programme actually started in about 2013-14, and we saw about 70% growth from the inception of the programme, with very, very significant uplift in public transport usage. The park and ride, which had been delivered at the early stages, again rose by about 75% usage whenever glider came in. And at pre-COVID, it was full every day, over 500 cars. The punctuality of the services improved significantly, and we also saw very significant improvements in emissions due to the hybrid vehicles. I guess perhaps most satisfying in terms of the performance of the system is is the recognition, I guess, by others of the benefits that it brings. And the last point just in that slide that I make is that it is now widely referenced when you look at house brochures or any property sales along the corridors. They specifically mention access to the glider system and the benefits that that brings. The aim now going forward, I guess, as with all public transports, to rebuild the patronage. Glider has shown quite significant resilience during COVID, and certainly has been the best performing service within Northern Ireland. It has bounced back now to over 80% usage. We're introducing now over the next 18 months full integrated account-based ticketing across all public transport in Northern Ireland. And again, that'll help to make services more attractive. We're hoping to finalise the outline business case for phase 2 in 2022, which will, as you see from the map on the right-hand side there, will serve South Belfast and one of the 3 routes shown there to North Belfast. Just closing thoughts, I guess, around BRT in general. And I think it is increasingly noticeable that a number of cities that would be widely regarded as having significant mature transport systems in terms of trams and various other modes of transport. They do see the benefits in bus rapid transit. We see in Paris now they're thinking about in fact they're proceeding with a new bus rapid transit system with inductive charging, so it'll carry batteries which will be recharged from plates in the ground. Also Brisbane, moving to similar models as well. So there's a number of cities now throughout the world are adopting this as a proportionate way to meet the demand on some of their busier corridors. Just to leave you then, I guess, with some of the lessons learned. I think it's very important to start with very clear objectives. We set out what we term performance and service standards, give clear direction for what you wanted to achieve, and the importance of adhering to that to make sure that you get the benefits that you are aiming for from the outset of the project. The holistic system that I talked about and the strong brand, and I think in all of it, I would say that the infrastructure is absolutely key. These services need to run on the right road infrastructure in the right areas if they're going to be successful. Combined delivery between the roads authority and the operator is extremely beneficial. Do prepare contingencies. We were, I guess, caught out by the sheer popularity of Glider when we launched it. We had to move very quickly to try and meet the demand. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it did present challenges. Promoted extensively. And I guess it's part of what's happening today is meaningful and ongoing stakeholder engagement, engaging early enough to allow concepts to evolve and to be changed. So thank you very much.
Robin, that was fascinating, and we've got a lot of comments actually on. I am going to take one or two now rather than saving them up because I think that it seems relevant to do that at this stage. So there's a couple that just a question: who operates the buses? Is it a private company? Is it the local authority? How does that work?
It's TransLink, so the organisation that I work for, and it's a government-owned company. I guess it's slightly different than the arrangement that exists within the rest of GB. Probably something a wee bit closer to Transport for London, but we operate it as a government-owned company. We are overseen by the Minister for Infrastructure and by the Department for Infrastructure. They fund us as well, so it is a slightly different model. It's not a private company.
Question about things like, can you take bicycles on, or is that something that you have to leave your bike behind? How does that work?
Yeah, and I guess that's been one of the focus for us. I mean, pre-COVID, I'd be quite honest, we had difficulty finding room to get people on board, such was the popularity of it. So you have this balance between the various demands. We had a big focus on accessibility. The difficulty with bringing bicycles on to these services, you're then competing for spaces where wheelchairs and prams and buggies would go, and I think those need to be given priority. We do allow folding bikes on, And it is something, it's always an active consideration. Our big focus at the moment as a public transport operator is to try and ensure that there's attractive alternatives for people to leave their bikes at stops and at interchanges to take the service. And then we're also working with partners in the council regarding integration with the likes of the Belfast bike system, which is the public bike hire system, so that people have an option maybe to cycle to the interchange with their own bike, leave it securely, take the service, and then perhaps hire a bike if that's appropriate at the other end.
We have to do a lot of changes to the infrastructure, what road widening or that sort of thing as part of this.
It wasn't extensive. Again, it's about choosing the right routes. We targeted the most dense routes in terms of ensuring that we get the demand onto the services to sustain it and serve the majority of people. But yes, most of it's relatively narrow or relatively minor widening in the context of the actual width of it, but it is quite extensive in length. So you may find that you maybe need another half a metre on your road width in order to provide the bus lane. So there is a lot of that. I guess I would term it as trench warfare in many ways. It's the really difficult stuff you do for quite a distance to try and ensure that you have the appropriate width. But that's the nature of trying to do these types of systems within confined urban areas. There's places where you have to make compromise. We probably have about 60%, 65% coverage of bus lanes along the routes because we simply can't get the 100%. The width isn't there. And that's just a choice that you have to make within a city environment.
About this, the key fob access to the shelters, how does that work? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, for the cycle shelter, so you can register and get a key fob. I think it's something like a £10 card initially, and then basically you have access to that, which you can then swipe and you can store your bicycle within it. We worked with Sustrans quite closely in the delivery of those to ensure that they were, fit for purpose in terms of what cyclists would look for in such a facility.
So in terms of, the future, you talked about, other routes, but, is this something that you would envisage growing outwards over time, covering a more extensive area? Is that the sort of long-term vision? And the other question on here is, do you see the glider as the solution, the mass transit solution, or if the popularity continues and increases, would you consider other technologies? Would you consider a tram system on one of the routes, for example?
Yeah, in terms of growing outwards, probably not. And it is a mistake, I think, that's often made with these types of services, particularly when they become popular. And we've had the calls, can it not run to locations outside of Belfast? They're designed for intense urban operation. That's where the benefit comes with the multiple doors, with the off-board ticketing. They're really designed for stopping a lot. So what you don't want to do is run them out to areas where you've significant lengths where you're not stopping, and that tends to happen the further out that you get from the city. So really what we want to do is focus any future development again on high density corridors, and that's what phase 2 is looking at the moment. In terms of future technologies, we always left the door open with this, that and this is what you see as well when you look at some of the continental cities and the likes of France, where they've moved. They've started off with BRT, and then they have thresholds at which they will then consider moving perhaps to tram. What you will find is they tend to have an intermediate point, if you like, where they will be operating triac articulated vehicles. So rather than the 18 metre you see here, a lot of them will be operating 24 metre. Now, that isn't currently permissible within the UK legislation, but I think that is also a model for the future, and that's what you can see there in that Paris example and with Brisbane and that. You can carry over 200 people in those vehicles. It's a very efficient way of moving people. Whether Belfast, will move to a tram system, I'm not sure. We still have capacity there to grow glider, and that certainly will be our focus for the coming years.
One final quick question: is it a cashless system? is it a cashless system? Do you pay by card or?
That's what we're just introducing at the moment, Martin. At the moment, you can pay both cash and card at the machines. We're moving now to contactless on board all our vehicles, and it'll become a full tap on, tap off system where very similar to London, where your bank card now will basically get you anywhere in Northern Ireland on bus or train, and that'll be the situation we'll be in hopefully in about the year to 18 months time.
I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time, but we may pick up on some of the other questions that people have raised in the panel at the end. So thank you, Robin. That was great.
Thank you.
So Steve, we'll move on to you now. Steve Tuff from Nottingham.
Yes. Yeah. So my name's Steve Tuff. I'm head of transport operations at Nottingham City Council, and I've been involved in the tram development in Nottingham for about 20 years. So it's been very much the main part of my working life for a long time. I'm just going to spend sort of 10 minutes or so just covering one or two of the key characteristics of the system, the benefits that come from it, some of the key issues in development, and then just a brief bit about the commercial case of putting a system in. Right, okay, thank you. So Net Phase 2 then was the last main development on the system, and it led to, we've now got 2 lines which cross each other in the city centre, which is 32 kilometres of tram line with 37 trams operating up to 51 stops. We've got frequent, reliable cross-city services with about 8 trams an hour on each leg. You'll see from the picture there that system sort of parallels the M1 as well for park and ride, which I'll come back on to. Just in terms of some of the other questions that we briefly asked, the system's cash and contactless. We don't allow cycles on trams because they're viewed as a hazard, and they would have to sort of be in the places on the vehicles which are restricted to wheelchair and buggies. And there is an OAP concession on trams which is discretionary locally. It's not part of the statutory national scheme, but we allow that as a local decision. One point to highlight there in the first bullet there is the cost. So the first line, which opened in 2004, cost 200 million. Second line, 500 million. So they're very expensive systems to operate. And I guess this is where the issue between do you do a glider type system or a tram, the question needs to be asked. And what research tends to show is that if your objectives are around modal shift, so that's taking people out of cars and putting them onto public transport, then trams do tend to have a higher proportion of people who are prepared to do that. There's quite lots of research that suggests that. But against that, you've got the much higher cost. So it's sort of that balance about the degree of benefit you get from the system against the amount of money that you can invest in it. So that's sort of one of the challenges for local authorities to weigh up in what system they propose. So in terms of the characteristics of the system that make it successful, I think one of the most important is the flexible operation. So it's absolutely critical that most of a tram system is segregated from traffic, because that's what gives you the added value and the benefit, gives you obviously reliable service, quicker journey times, and it's the bit that makes it appealing to people. But at the same time, local geographical constraints can mean sometimes it's not possible to be segregated. So you've got to have that adaptability that in certain pinch points you go into the road or you cross roads, but generally if you're offline, that's where the benefit is. And the Nottingham system, it's got about 80 to 85% is either segregated or sort of operates on minor roads in the city and avoids the busier roads. It also is a system that can operate through pedestrianised areas. It's operated through the Market Square and the system in Nottingham for about 20 years now, the first line. Never really been a problem. People adapted to it very quickly. Drivers sort of drive like you drive a car on line of sight. So if they see a hazard up front, they'll ring the bell or brake. So it certainly can work through pedestrianised areas. The system has traffic priority at all junctions, so gives it that added value. And then integration is really important, both in terms of services. So it's really important that it integrates with local rail. So pictured there on the right is Nottingham Station, where the tram basically runs over the top of the station and allows access down onto platforms. It's got numerous bus service integration with where there is some bus competition on the route. Obviously, bus companies can run services they choose, but in a number of places they have adapted their services to basically run feeders into the tram system to bring people into Nottingham. And then in terms of travel, we have an integrated card in Nottingham called the Robin Hood card, surprisingly, which effectively allows travel on one card on all local bus, rail and tram systems. So that's something that's a voluntary arrangement between operators. There is a sort of small premium on that, so you pay a bit more than you would if you just had a card with one operator, but it just allows you to jump on and off different operators and makes the system much more accessible. And then park and ride, I mentioned that's a really popular part of the system. We've got 7 park and ride sites on the system. A couple of those were former bus sites that were taken over when Line 1 opened. But of those, we've got 5 of them up to the pandemic were full in the morning peak. So we're sort of looking at work to extend the parking availability there. Really important part of the, particularly linking roads on the west side into the M1, just to get people before, obviously they journey in. Most park and rides are best placed right on the edge of the urban area, where you get people before they sort of hit the urban streets, and sort of maximises the journey time benefits. So just to go through quickly some of the benefits on the Nottingham system. Well, up to the pandemic, it attracted about 20 million passenger trips per annum. It hasn't recovered to that yet. It is going up at the moment, but we are still relying on some government support to keep the system going. But it did lead to a significant increase in public transport use. So from Line 1 opening to sort of the pandemic, public transport use in Nottingham grew about 16 million journeys, and that was completely against national trend, where the vast majority of places have seen a reduction in use in that time. It's had really high customer satisfaction, and that's one of the points I alluded to at the start, that about 30% of travellers formerly use the car or travel by park and ride. So it does show that people have been willing to change their travel habits when the system was introduced, which was one of the main objectives. And of course, it really massively increases the capacity of the transport network by operating just one highly efficient line through the city centre with sort of a tram in each direction about every 3 minutes. It takes out so many buses that would sort of have had the equivalent capacity. And there has been some bus congestion in Nottingham city centre, and this has really helped to alleviate that and allow the network to work at its most efficient. And then sort of more broader benefits. Obviously, it provides excellent access to some sort of 1,200, well, over 1,000 workspaces and very significant employee commute. It's also within 30% sorry, there's a tram stop within 800 metres of 30% of the Greater Nottingham population, and it also serves some of the most deprived areas nationally, with 40% of the catchment with no access to cars. It serves some of the most important employment sites outside the city centre, so including both universities, the region's largest hospital. It's also serves some of the biggest satellite towns in Nottingham, and a industrial estate that opened about 15 years ago. It sort of runs through the centre of that, so it very much links up some of the most some of the really the biggest attractors sort of outside the city centre. So it isn't just sort of travel from suburb to city centre, it's got two-way travel on much of it. And just to sort of emphasise that wider benefit point, we found that that there are six stops in the city centre, and so next to all of those stops since Line 1 opened, there's been some development, and so talking to developers, it's quite clear that the tram being there has been a major factor in that. It hasn't been the only decision in how they decided to locate where they have, but it's clearly been one of the factors they've taken into account in why those developments have happened. So it's been good, very good for the economy. And also, so Beeston Town Centre, which is sort of the largest centre in the Nottingham suburban area, I mean, they basically completely remodeled the town centre on the back of having the tram system sort of running through there. And then obviously the system has to integrate into the local environment, and the opportunity has been taken to sort of improve and upgrade sort of both hard and soft landscaping around it to try and make it as attractive as possible within local environments. So just some of the key points that sort of promoters have to think about in how they develop schemes. I mean, I'm not going to go through the history in any detail, but I think what this slide shows you is that the system in the UK, developing a tram system, you're in for the long haul. For both Line 1 and Phase 2, it took 15 years from the first feasibility studies to be completed to actually having tram operations. We've got a very sort of adversarial process here where you have to submit business cases constantly to government, and you have a public inquiry, and it's very much a slow process through the various processes you've got to go through. Whereas I think in Europe there's much more acceptance that such schemes are a good thing for local areas, and they tend to be able to generally develop much more quickly. So you've got to have a long-term commitment to actually deliver a system in this country. And to do that, you've really got to get a mix of really high-quality advisors. Have a local team who guides the local authority through all the processes, the stages you've got. But you need support sort of from engineers and legal and parliamentary agents, project managers, economists, all that sort of thing, just to make sure you can get through each stage. And then sort of throughout the development process, in talking to stakeholders and consultation is really important. You've got to bring the local population with you throughout it, and having strong political support, which is unwavering, including sort of a political champion was really beneficial for us. And we sort of got city stakeholders on board from the start and did some really detailed consultations early on. So the public, they weren't necessarily with us with all of it. There's with developing a system like this, there are significant local impacts. And for example, we had to acquire 1,300 plots of land, including knocking down over 100 properties. So it wasn't easy. So you are going to get objections, but what you need to do is be really transparent and open and bring people with you on that. And it was really beneficial when we got to a public inquiry that there really were no surprises. We'd had the debates and discussions with people who were less in favour. So it made us able to present a much more coherent case at inquiry, and certainly the inspector sort of came down very heavily in favour of the benefit of the system to the local area. So I'll just finish very briefly with sort of the commercial case. I won't go into much detail on this, but essentially we developed the Nottingham tram with a PFI contract. Now, PFI contracts are no longer in vogue. Government have gone away from that. But the essence of what we did was we created a setup where the system is operated in the private sector, so it incentivises good operation, and they get paid if they operate a good service. So there's a whole series of measurements based on things like reliability, punctuality, cleanliness, so repairing, vandalism, all things like that. So if they don't perform, they don't get paid. And I think it has been fairly successful in that point of view. The whole system is geared around those parameters, which in turn means that the public gets a good quality service. So I think in any future procurements, I think making sure that there's an incentivisation to perform is really important. And finally, probably the thing to highlight is that in any expensive system like this, the government expects significant local contribution to show that local commitment that they really want to go for this expensive scheme. So in our case, we had to sort of raise, between 100 and 200 million pounds locally to put the system in. And the way we did that, and we're the only ones so far in the country who have done it, is to introduce something called the workplace parking levy. Now that's a charge on each business parking space in the city for businesses with 10 places or more. It's a charge on the business, not on the employee, that the business could obviously pass that on. Charges sort of £1 to £2 a day, something like that. So it's not huge, but what it does do, it sort of partly disincentivises you to come and park, whilst at the same time creating this revenue stream, which we then put into the developing the tram system. So, as I say, at the moment we're the only ones who've done it. Leicester have recently announced an intention to go down that line, and there has been a lot of interest from other cities. But a local city has to identify on current rules sort of a way to pay for roughly 25% of systems like this. So I think that's all I was going to say. So yeah, thanks. And obviously happy to take any questions, or we'll do that later.
Steve, just a couple of things from me before we move on. Then, I mean, there was this, there is this question about, you've talked about the capital costs and how that was sort of worked out through PFI and the work-based parking levy. In terms of the sort of general running costs, does the income from fares cover the revenue costs of running the service?
I can't know that for sure, because all the operation is put into the private sector. The model, so the business cases we put in, that's the model. So essentially operating costs are covered by revenues, with the infrastructure then paid by public sector grant. I think at the moment it isn't covering costs. Where before the pandemic, I think it was there or thereabouts. It's certainly not a money spinner, but it was more or less covering it, as I understand it.
Taken as a whole, I mean, this is quite a hard question to answer, but someone's asked the question. Taken as a whole, then, I will ask the question, but you'd probably not be able to answer it. Yeah, someone is asking, is it an expensive system? You know, taken as a whole, taking everything into account, is it expensive to run a trans system, to develop one, etc.?
Yes.
Compared with alternatives, I guess is the question. Yeah.
It is, and that's sort of something I did allude to briefly, but it is an expensive system. It's what, 20 to 30 million pounds a kilometre to put in. Clearly, things like moving utilities is very expensive, but it's something that Nottingham's really proud of. It gives us, combined with other modes, it gives us really a world-class public transport system, which I think is a real attractor to the local area. That there's a sense it gives the city a bit of a continental feel. I mean, when you ever look at any media around Nottingham, the tram's always part of it. And I think, as I mentioned, that it's all about cost and benefit. So I think there is evidence to suggest that a tram does attract more people who are not natural public transport users than the bus does. And of course, things like Glider have got their place. So my remit covers bus as well, so I'm totally for bus. But I think things like modal shift, people leaving their cars, they like the idea of a tram, a fixed rail system, permanent. You know where the stops are. There's easy on and off. Like the London Underground. So there's a real knowledge. Bus can change its route, can be deregistered in 6 weeks. So I think there is quite a lot of evidence. So it's a question of where you want to pitch yourselves. Can you pitch for the expensive system and get the greater benefit? Or in some places, it may be that it works better at a lower level. Our business case suggested it was what the benefit to cost ratio made it value for money. And I guess you've got to work through your business case for each corridor to see if that's the case. I mean, I think we're probably a small city for a tram system. It's probably fair to say you wouldn't want to go any smaller than us. But I'd certainly have thought Leeds, you'd have a pretty strong business case if you get the corridors right.
I think we thought we had a strong business case over the last 20, 30 years, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were lucky first time round. I think perhaps it was a bit of a gold-plated system. I think perhaps it was made more expensive than it could have been. But yeah.
Okay, so could we? Thanks, Steve. That was really interesting, and we'll hopefully have a bit of time at the end just to sort of ask some more general questions. Yeah. But I'm going to hand over to Rob and Jeff from Cardiff, who are going to talk about what they're doing, which again is a contrast to the previous two examples. So over to you guys. Thank you.
So can you see my slide, Martin?
Yep.
Not used to using Zoom, so I think I'm there and you can hear me. All right, good.
Yep.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Ogden. I'm Director of Planning, Development and Advisory Services at Transport for Wales. I've been involved at Transport for Wales for quite some time. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But at the moment, my role at the moment, along with my colleague Rob Jones, who's on today, we're largely looking at the future development of metro schemes across Wales, and I'll say a little bit more about that. So probably a slightly different approach to what you're going to hear from the other two. I'd just like to say, in terms of Robin's presentation earlier on Glider, I know some of our team have been out to Belfast to visit and see that, and would reinforce what you're saying about it exuding quality, and that's the thing that really comes over and makes a big difference to the experience, and I guess the patronage that it attracts, as he said earlier. So I'll give you a quick overview of Transport for Wales and our Metro programme. I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly because there's a number of them here. We'll talk a little bit more about the South Wales Metro, the key facts, some of the key facts, the challenge that we had and how we came to finding the solution that we're now implementing. And then Rob will talk a little bit about what we're doing beyond the current activities, looking into the future to transform further in the Metro in South East Wales. So that overview to start off with. Transport for Wales is wholly owned by the Welsh Government. We started off back in 2015, 2016, very much advising the Welsh Government on the procurement of the next Wales and Borders rail franchise and the South Wales Metro. Since then, we've obviously had COVID hit everybody hard. As a result of that and the arrangements we've now got in place, we've got a bit of a change from the procurement that we went through in terms of the parties that now play roles in it, and we've now got Transport for Wales, which is Transport for Wales Rail Limited, which is wholly owned by Transport for Wales, which is now the rail operator for the Wales and Borders rail franchise. So a bit of a change there. We've got a vision, purpose and objectives, whereas at the start we were, as I say, very much about providing advice. Now we are focused very much on creating customer focused services through a safe transport network of which Wales is proud. And that means a lot of working with lots of other stakeholders. The governance arrangements for transport in Wales is not entirely straightforward. There are different bits that have devolved, some that aren't. So we work very closely with Network Rail, we work very closely with the local authorities, etc., to try and integrate and increasingly integrate the transport system to meet the overall objectives for Wales. Moving on, since back in 2015, more recently, we've now evolved into looking at more than one metro system. So we're going to talk much more about the South Wales Metro in a minute. We've got our Swansea Bay and West Wales Metro that we're working on too, and North Wales Metro. And the bit in the middle of Wales, highly rural, we've got a rural pathway, an agenda there, which we're addressing transport challenges in that region too. These have all got very different approaches to what metro means, and one of the challenges for us is to actually convey that in a sensible way to users so that they understand what metro means for them in the different parts of Wales. A massive agenda for all of us and a massive agenda for Wales and in the Wales transport strategy is the reduction of CO2 emissions. We've got some big challenges on that, driving big focus on modal shift, and Rob will say a little bit more about that at the end, some of the challenges and how we're trying to deal with that, but very much a focus around active travel, around public transport, and about reducing the need for people to use the private car. So that's a big agenda behind everything that we're doing at the moment. So Metro, okay, so this is the branding and the sort of language we've been using in South Wales around the Metro programme. We want it to change the way everybody travels, creating a modern, sustainable bus, rail and active travel, cycling and walking network, so that can transform people's lives and reduce the environmental impact of our transport network overall. Going back to some of the comments earlier, there's a big challenge about the use of the private car and households that don't necessarily have access to a car, and this is about helping them and helping us even up the region. I'll say a little bit more about that, about the challenges we've got across South Wales that the Metro is trying to address. So just a quick skim over the top of what Metro is, and this is a map of the rail network in South East Wales, and that is basically the backbone of the Metro as we see it. And in a minute I'll show you another slide which focuses in on the next step of what we're doing at the moment around transformation of what we call the core valley lines. So as you can see, there's an existing rail network there. we've got services running on that already, and what we're doing is we're seeking to improve the frequency and the quality of those services alongside improvements in bus access, alongside active travel facilities, etc., to make a coherent rail network. For those of you that aren't on that aware of the geography of southeast Wales, that map there is broadly about 50 miles across from east to west and about 30 miles from north to south. So we're talking about quite a significant area there. We're talking about areas that are very urban, suburban and rural. We've got very different geographies. We've got the lines tend to be running along the valleys, the old coal lines that were then transferred into passenger lines. So very valley and north-south routed into Cardiff. And a key thing about what we're trying to do on this is not necessarily creating a one-way direction for travel, but actually, as I said a minute ago, evening up the opportunities across the whole of southeast Wales for employment, etc. So and why is that important to us? So we want to, as I say, southeast Wales contains both areas of high economic growth and areas of real need. If we look at the GVE of, I don't know why that says West Wales and the Valleys, sorry, that's that should say southeast Wales is about 65% of UK average, whilst Cardiff is a bit over that, a bit over the UK average at 104.3%. So an overall challenge of getting the region more linked up and supporting that economic growth in a sustainable way. There are about 1.5 million people who live in the region, but it can be difficult to move around, and we want to try and benefit from agglomeration. The challenge and the opportunity we've got, just spelling out some of those at a macro level. Big challenges around land use planning. We really want to focus much more on transit orientated development, so ensuring that future development actually takes place around what we've got as opportunities for transport, and that means a lot looking much further ahead, looking at the requirements for future development and stitching that in, and Rob may say a little bit more about that in a minute. Promoting active travel has been mentioned a couple of times already, making sure that we're linking in with the cycle network and helping people to move around without actually needing to use vehicles of any type for short distances. Integrating the bus and the rail network very much more at interchanges, and we're doing work with local authorities on that. We've got a couple of schemes in that space at the moment. Cardiff Interchange just outside Cardiff Central Station with a new bus station there. We're working on that. We've also got activities taking place at Porth in Rhondda-Cynon-Taf at a smaller but equally important approach for the communities around that area. And then of course we need to make sure that we've got things like smart ticketing taking place, or ticketless travel as is more going to be more and more the case. Improving the signage, making sure that we've got good wayfinding for users, and of course integrating very well with the road network, so we can encourage people to move from private car onto the public transport network through things like park and ride. So just going back to the how we got to a solution for the South Wales Metro, and certainly the development of the core valley lines, which is the backbone of how we're improving the transport system right at the moment. We adopted a very different procurement process. Back in 2016, 2017, we went out to the market for a 15-year contract. And the main functions or parts of that contract were to operate the Wales and Borders rail services right across the whole of Wales, to design and deliver the next phase of the South Wales Metro, which is about £750 million of capital works, with funding from the Welsh Government, European Regional Development funding, City Deal funding from from the local region, which was very much supported by UK government as well. So we've got a number of key stakeholders in the funding of this who really want to see it be successful. And then the last part was to manage and maintain the infrastructure in the core Cardiff Valley. So a key difference here between what we see elsewhere on the rail network, the heavy rail network, the Network Rail network, is that we were bringing track and train together to bring together a solution for us. And we went out to market actually with objectives, as was mentioned earlier, I think by on the Nottingham presentation, with clear objectives of what we were trying to achieve, rather than necessarily a technical solution that we had in place. And we put it to the market to come up with a technical solution around a number of parameters to help us do that. To do that, we established a series with Welsh Government. We established a series of priorities. I'm just taking an example here to give you an idea of what they were. And there was a couple of pages of these. Essentially, within the South Wales Metro, it was the ability to operate at least 4 trains an hour across the core valley lines, from the top of the valleys down to Cardiff, and potentially increasing the frequencies south of Pontypridd and Caerphilly, which are key points on some of that network. We wanted to reduce the time on the core valley lines journeys by about 20% compared to the current timetable. We needed to accommodate freight operations that exist as well, or could potentially exist in the future. We wanted to operate direct services between major residential areas in the metro area, including Cardiff City and the Bay. And lastly, I guess, and perhaps this plays more out into the tram area and the on-street area, is the potential for what we were doing to be extended to provide additional stations and extensions, including future on-street running. So just talking about the challenge we had in doing all that was, we go back to the map I was showing you earlier. The bit in yellow now is the core valley lines, and they're the lines that run from Treherbert, Aberdare, Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney down into Cardiff and Cardiff Bay. And we were taking that out of the ownership of Network Rail and taking it into Welsh Government and our ownership actually, and then bringing the track and train together so that actually our bidders were able to provide us with the opportunity of technical solutions which would be different potentially to what could be offered on a normal Network Rail operated bit of the rail system. We then went through, so we started off with, as you can see, we started off with a very thin set of requirements. And then over the next few years, we thickened that up into material bids from our different bidders, and contractualized that over the period of 2 years, and that led to a contract signature on in June 2018. Now the process we went through on that procurement was called competitive dialogue. It was very resource intensive. It meant that, as I say, we started off with a very slim set of objectives, and gradually through that dialogue, that got developed into a more fundamental set of requirements, which were then bid against in a normal way, I guess, a more traditional way, right towards the end of that process, and that's what was then used to form the contract going forwards. Another thing that happened through that process was that not all of the bidders that started that journey ended the journey with us, but we were able to take that through and appoint Keolis Amy as the winning bidder in 2018. Very briefly, the scope of the works that they are doing on the core valley lines includes lots of different things. This is all, depending on what they're talking about, there might be some slight change to this, so a little bit subject to change here, but it includes a lot of civils works, includes a lot of station improvements, includes provision of, electrical power, new signalling, lots of new signalling arrangements, new track arrangements, including doubling or redoubling of the line, some lowering of the track, remodelling of different bits of stations, new depot at Taftswell. Smart electrification is an important point here, that actually the winning bidder proposed a solution which meant that actually we could avoid a lot of track lowering by creating a system that allowed electrification and overhead electrification in some places, but actually for the vehicles to move between those where there were any overhead obstacles, so catenary-free sections there. I'll say why that was in a minute in terms of the vehicles that we've got operating. So just as a basis from what we had pre-COVID-19, we got pacers and sprinters running on the network, as you can see there, top left, and we got them running through that Core Valley Lines network, as you can see there. I won't go into the detail of that, but this chart here shows a bit more interesting sort of service frequencies. So pre-COVID levels, you can see generally 2 trains at the top of the valleys running down into Queen Street, which is sort of halfway up, 12 services an hour going through there. With the full metro service in place, that would be 4 trains an hour to the top of the valleys, as I mentioned earlier, with 18 going through Queen Street. So that's a huge improvement and a huge service uplift from what we've got at the moment. So that's what the metro rail services post transformation look like. And you can see that we've got 2 new vehicles operating. We've got these metro vehicles here that tend to be the ones running in that direction, and we've got these more traditional, I guess, heavy rail vehicles that are running down this route. And the reason they are more traditional, although you'll see why they're not that traditional in a minute, is that they do have to run through onto the main rail network and then into the non-Core Valley Lines, which is this area down here to the southwest into the Vale of Glamorgan. So we needed vehicles that could run on more traditional networks as well as our own. So those 2 vehicles, the ones that are the tram trains here, these are this type of vehicle. Both of these sets of rolling stock are made by manufactured by Stadler. So these ones are dual power, I guess you would call them. We've got their overhead line where you've got it, and battery operation where there isn't any, and they are capable of operating on line of sight tramway operation, as we were hearing a bit earlier. And then we've got these vehicles here, they're actually tri-modes. So these can do what I said a minute ago in terms of running under overhead lines or with battery, but they also have the opportunity to run as on a diesel engine as well, where we don't have any overhead electrification for longer distances, and the batteries wouldn't be able to cope with it. So it's a very innovative approach, which addressed the challenges that we've got, both in terms of the objectives we're trying to achieve and the budget that we've got too. So I'll now hand over to Rob, who's going to talk to us a little bit about beyond the Core Valley Lines and what we're doing next.
Thanks, Jeff. You okay to continue sharing your screen for the next few minutes? So
yeah,
saves any risk of a problem. Yeah, so thanks. So I work with Jeff. I'm a strategic development program manager for the Cardiff and Capital Region Metro program, and it feels a bit strange talking about the future beyond what we're still trying to pull off now. In this case, I think, you know, obviously very different type of system we're bringing in here, a different scale, and we're a bit behind Nottingham and Belfast, which are much more sort of city-based solutions, obviously. So yeah, moving on then, beyond the Core Valley Lines transformation. Firstly, we've got to make sure we integrate fully with the existing local transport, in particular, and regional transport, and capture those benefits fully. A lot of the CVL transformation is about increasing frequencies, and that makes for a much more attractive proposition of the existing network to feed in bus services and active travel and get people and park and ride and get people out of their cars as early as we can and onto our metro system. And obviously synergies there locally with local bus and active travel. Then it's about continuing electrification, ideally to the South Wales main lines, and increasingly utilising battery beyond the electrified sections as we get into the street environment in particular, where you know the overhead electrical infrastructure is less aesthetic and more troublesome to have. But equally, battery can only go so far, can only do so much. So it's about bringing that in and using that in the right way. And then further branch line potential as well, potentially doing some feasibility studies elsewhere as to where we could bring in electrification. That will be easier where Transport for Wales or Welsh Government owns the assets, and where Network Rail, for example, does. And then tram train extensions, metro extensions, as Jeff has alluded to, increasingly into the on-street environment, particularly we think in the Cardiff area, and potentially then Newport, but also around enabling strategic development, perhaps in places not currently thought of as trip destinations, say at the heads of the valleys, beyond Aberdare or Merthyr, those kind of environments. And really importantly, I think, is a further growth and diversification of the metro as a concept on what it is. You know, beyond the heavy and light rail that we have now, and across to bus rapid transit, active travel and interchange, and building on the Burns Commission M4, the expectations there around the southeast, and doing something instead of building a new road that really makes a difference to the congestion, environmental challenges that we have in that part of Wales.
Rob, I'm just conscious, Martin, you probably want us to come to a conclusion, do you, in terms of taking questions? Should we quickly focus on this slide?
Yep, no problem at all.
And then close it down, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so all this is really is an illustration of some of our emerging priorities to 2029. And you see there that what I was talking about, some extensions in the south area of Cardiff and north, represented by the orange lines. You'll see new stations improving on connectivity around the Cardiff area in particular, and the more built-up areas from sort of mid-valleys downwards on the Rumney line and the Treherne and Merthyr lines. And you'll see that we've got some bus corridors identified around the mid-valleys and between Cardiff and Newport, where we're looking to develop and test bus rapid transit systems. So very different approach to Belfast in a more of an interurban approach. And then active travel, both in terms of feeding in locally to the metro system, but also in its own right potentially with increasing understanding about what can be achieved through electric bikes and the like, and some of the distances not being that great. Active travel can provide a strategic option in itself that we need to fully utilise. And also we've still got some strategic corridor study areas to the west and east that you'll see that we're looking to develop further also, and we will bring those options that come out of there into the business case packages that we're developing elsewhere. So this is all very high level stuff and still requires a lot of business case development before it can actually secure funding and go into delivery.
I think just to build on one of the questions that was asked earlier about the expense of systems. Well, yes, they can be expensive, but it depends what you're doing with them and the business case. It's horses for courses, I think was being said earlier. So, bus rapid transit, as I mentioned, we've been visiting Glider to look at that for some of the routes that we're looking at, and equally we've got a rail network that we can take advantage of. So we do, it does need to be looked at on the business case. I think it was it Nottingham talking about the fact that they'd had problems with bus congestion. Well, and that's been resolved by trams. Each of those buses has a driver, etc., and its own depot resourcing requirements, etc. So it's not necessarily as cheap an option as it may be for the same patronage that you're seeking to attract. So Martin, should we close it there and let you round off with some questions?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. We've if everyone else wants to come on, turn their videos on and unmute, we'll just have a very quick sort of 5-minute wrap up. Jeff and Rob, on what you showed us there, which was fascinating, and again a different example from the previous two. There were a couple of quick questions maybe you could answer. One was around sort of north-south connections. So someone with a vested interest, I believe, asked a question about Carmarthen, Aberystwyth, for example. Is that sort of part of the thinking as well, longer term, those sorts of connections?
Yeah. So yes, it is. It's whether we might have, with our tram train technology, we might have some different options now that could deal with some of the challenges that we've got around the geography of Wales, and we're giving that some thought at the moment about how that could deal with some of those things. Yeah. So yes, it is. Yeah. And
disused railway lines. Are there any disused railway lines that you're planning on bringing back into use?
There are disused railway lines. Again, it does depend. It's always attractive to look at whether a disused railway line might come back into use in some shape or form. They are being used for all sorts of things, as we'll see across the whole of the UK, for active travel routes, for rail routes, and sort of everything in between. So yeah, certainly on the table. But what I would go back to is with the tram train technology we've got now, we can do steeper gradients, sharper turns, etc. So it may be that actually we can find different ways of connecting communities that might not have been possible through the old routes. But there's quite a lot of work to be done to shape that up in terms of meaningful business cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left in theory, but I don't know if you're all okay just to hang on for 5 minutes. Would that be okay? And I'll just sort of wrap up with a couple of questions that you might all want to answer. So one thing that someone put in the chat, which I think is an interesting point, is that all three examples have, to a greater or lesser extent, a significant public body involvement, if you like, whether it's a local authority or a transport authority or whatever. Different types of involvement, but they all have that. It's not a purely private enterprise. I don't know, Steve, Robin, Jeff, Robbie, if you just want to reflect on that, and do you think you have the right sort of setup, and would it be different in an ideal world? Steve, do you want to start off?
Yes, I'd say from the tram point of view that it wouldn't pay for a private organisation to come and try and do it themselves. You need to be part of the local highway authority as well, but just a simple fact is the capital cost needs to be publicly funded. So if you get that bit funded, you should be working to a model where the operating cost is covered. And just quickly to clarify one point in the chat, which is sort of related, there was a suggestion that in each of the case studies there was some local public sector control over the bus network, which allowed integration. That's actually not the case in Nottingham. We do own the local bus company, but it's very much an arm's length ownership. They operate their own business objectives, and they do compete with the tram in certain locations where we prefer that they wouldn't. So it isn't that way. It's very much market led.
Yeah, so it's one of a number of operators, albeit the dominant operator.
The dominant, yes, it is the dominant one. Yes. Yeah.
Robin, I mean, yours is probably, the most extreme, but in terms of public-private, you're on very much the public side of things, aren't you? Really? And that work that must obviously you feel it works the way you have it set up.
Yeah, I think it's like a lot of the same challenges exist that Steve has alluded to. It's significant investment. It's not on the scale of tram, but it's still very significant, and you wouldn't get the return on the capital as a private investor. So, I think these things need to be taken in the round, and as Steve said with the tram system too, if you get too bogged down just in the simplistic cost, it doesn't tell the bigger picture. And these things contribute to society in so many different ways, and the business. And unfortunately, the challenge we have with business cases, it's very difficult to monetize all the value, and very often things just aren't captured. I think from our perspective with Glider, it was a transition from current bus routes into the Glider system. So there was a logic in it being retained within and under the operation of TransLink. That enables further integration with services. So there is a lot of sense in doing that, and it wouldn't really be viable. We did do market research in the early days, or the department did, to establish whether there was a private sector interest, but really as a standalone, there wasn't one.
And from the point of view of South Wales, again, I think your example is probably more complex in a way, isn't it? It's a slightly more complex picture.
Well, or much simpler, actually, perhaps.
Whichever way you look at it.
Yeah. Well, in that there's a massive social element to this, and I will go back to the thing about the finance case and the BCR needs to be looked very carefully on a sort of, a balanced scorecard basis alongside the other benefits that it brings, but it's got a massive social role to play in society. We're doing a lot of work at the moment, which we didn't really talk about in terms of the bus routes in Wales, and also bringing in things like demand responsive transport to actually make sure that we've got cost effective ways of doing things. But to all intents and purposes, that there is a subsidy that has to go into the network on an annual basis to run it, and that it's difficult to see how you can change that into the private sector. We are looking at how we can engage with the private sector, for investment in transit orientated developments, working with the public sector and the third sector as well. But it needs to be looked at in the round, rather than just on a pure pound note basis, as it were.
I mean, maybe we can just finish on this, which is just a short question about sort of, I suppose I call it image, which is, the aim, I guess, one of the key aims here is modal shift and encouraging people to use the systems that you're involved in rather than the car or whatever, and thinking about climate change. And it seems to me, I thought with the Glider in particular, but actually everything that you've been talking about across the three case studies, it's about how you attract people to use these services. I mean, how important do you think that actually is? I mean, Robin, I thought your example was really interesting because, you could just say you've got it's a bus service. But actually, it's much more than that, isn't it? And the sort of the image of how people experience it is part of this, encouraging people to use it rather than it's thinking of it as an ordinary bus service. And what do you think about that, Robin? How important is that?
I think there is. I mean, it's interesting. I think there is still a degree of stigma almost around bus usage, and it's interesting. Some of my former colleagues who based in offices along the route, they would have said to me that I never got the bus, but I get the Glider, and you are tempted to point out, well, it is still a bus, but, I think it's just that perception around it and how it's used. And, I think nowadays, strangely enough, there is this sense that people want to be able to sort of act independently, that, they don't really want to engage with a bus driver. They almost want to take that out of the equation. And I think with the off-board ticketing and the way the system operates, akin to a tram, it does seem to have I guess in some way captured people's imagination.
What's your sort of thoughts on that, you know, attractiveness part of things, and how have you built that up over the years? How have you sort of kept a head of steam going, really? Because I guess something's a novelty to start off with, but then it may wear off. You know, how have you kept that sort of momentum going?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree all Robin just said there, that there is bus snobbery, whether we like it or not. It's there, and I think that is a major factor in how the business case for the tram was put together. I don't think it's that hard to maintain that sort of attractiveness. I mean, the system's been put in there for the long term. All the trams get refurbished. There's new marketing ploys. As long as you keep your core service right, the high frequency, the reliability, your passenger information's telling you there's a tram every 3 to 5 minutes. I think there's enough there that, it's clearly an attractive system. It's highly present in the city centre, gets better penetration than buses do. So I don't think it needs, as long as it keeps doing the basics, it'll remain attractive, I think, to customers.
Do you agree with that?
I agree with everything that's been said. I think from personal experience, if you go somewhere new, you want to understand how do I engage with this then, and you want to make it as easy as possible so there's no barriers to you doing that. And once you've done that and you've got over that initial hurdle, then it becomes a lot easier and people start to take it into their habits, don't they? But it does rely, for mode shift and modal, for mode shift, it does need to be high quality. It needs to be as easy as anything, and I think the technology side is really coming on these days, and that's important, but actually we shouldn't necessarily let that get in the way of the more traditional approaches of providing good information as well as on apps, but alongside it. And certainly what we're looking at, and I guess that's what Steve and Robin have done with their systems.
It's 7 minutes past 2, and we this has been fascinating, and we could probably carry on afternoon, but I suspect gradually the numbers would diminish if we did that. We'd have a hardcore left listening in, but I know people have found this fascinating, and that's sort of judging that by the number of comments and questions. It's been a really good session. It's 3 really good contrasts actually to look at. So. We'll be, as I say, we'll be doing another webinar, we hope, in a couple of months' time, where we will focus on West Yorkshire and hopefully take some of the lessons and insights that you've provided today and add those to the mix when we discuss what might happen in West Yorkshire in the next decade. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate giving up your time to share what you're doing in your parts of the world. And thank you everyone for listening in. Hope you found that interesting, and we will join you soon. I should say we've recorded this session, so if people want to watch again, or if there are other people that couldn't make it, then we'll obviously send a link through to everyone who registered. So thanks very much. Hope you all have a good afternoon, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.